Archaeologists have discovered a huge ancient city hidden underground in Mexico, which may give a better understanding of the Maya civilization.
There is a reason why the thickest parts of the Amazon and the jungles of Guatemala are off limits. It's not to protect the trees, it is to keep you away from what is hidden underneath. A fresh scan of the jungle floor revealed a geometric anomaly that nature cannot produce. When they dug it up, they found the sleeping place of 3 individuals who are genetically unique. Their DNA breaks the laws of biology. It suggests that human history didn't start the way we think it did. In fact, it suggests we might be someone else's property. Breaking the obsidian seal. Usually they find causeways, house mounds, or maybe a lost ball court. But this time, the technician staring at the monitor froze. The laser return showed a void. Not a cave, not a sinkhole, but a geometric negative space. It was perfectly circular, measuring exactly 23 feet across, buried 40 feet beneath the foundation of a pyramid that was already 2,000 years old. You see, nature does not build in perfect circles. Water erosion is chaotic. Tectonic plates are messy. But this was math. The team on the ground was ordered to dig. It took them 3 weeks to cut through the layers of limestone, clay, and roots. At the 30-foot mark, the soil composition changed drastically. They hit a layer of blue clay that is not native to the region. It had to be brought there, imported from hundreds of miles away. This clay is significant because it is watertight. Whoever built this wanted to keep something dry. They wanted to keep something safe from the passage of time. Beneath the clay, they hit stone. But it wasn't the rough, mortar-bound limestone of the Maya. These were massive interlocking blocks of black basalt, fitted together so tightly that you couldn't slide a piece of paper between them. There was no mortar. It was dry stone masonry of the highest order, the kind you see in Peru or Egypt, not in the middle of the Guatemalan jungle. And then they found the door. It was a single slab of polished stone, lacking any hinges or handles. It was sealed shut with a resin that, upon chemical analysis, turned out to be a mixture of pine sap and a rubber compound treated with sulfur. Basically, ancient vulcanized rubber, harder than concrete. But here is the catch. The carvings on the door were wrong. They weren't the familiar intricate faces and jaguars of the Maya art style. They were geometric, spirals, dots, and lines. It looked more like a circuit board than a religious relief. The lead archaeologist noted in his log that his compass was spinning wildly near the slab. The stone itself was magnetized. This wasn't just a door, it was a shield. They had to use diamond-tipped saws to breach it. As the blade finally cut through, a hiss of compressed air escaped the chamber. Think about that for a second. That air had been trapped inside for thousands of years. The seal was perfect. When they finally pushed a camera probe into the darkness, the feed flickered on a screen in the command tent. The silence in that tent was heavy. Inside the chamber, the walls were coated in a vitrified material like glass. It was black obsidian, melted and sprayed onto the walls to create a mirror-like finish. And sitting in the center on 3 raised platforms were the subjects of this story. They were not skeletons. They were desiccated bodies, naturally mummified by the sterile, dry environment of the sealed room. There were 3 of them. They sat cross-legged, facing the center. They were draped in textiles that had disintegrated into dust at the slightest touch, but the ornaments remained. Jade, gold, and a strange, iridescent metal that didn't rust. But the team wasn't looking at the jewelry. They were looking at the heads. The skulls were elongated, stretching back at an unnatural angle. We have seen this before in other cultures, usually the result of binding the head as a baby, but the proportions here were different. The eye sockets were larger. The jawline was robust. These didn't look like deformed humans. They looked like a different breed entirely. The team collected samples immediately, bone fragments, tooth enamel, and dust from the floor. They packed them into sterile containers and shipped them to a high-security lab in Mexico City, and then a secondary set to a university in the United States. They thought they were just dating a new archaeological find. They had no idea they were about to unlock a biological time bomb. When the carbon dating results came back, the first red flag went up. The organic material in the chamber dated back to roughly 12,400 years ago. That is the late Pleistocene era. That is the Ice Age. The Maya civilization wouldn't arise for another 9,000 years. The Olmecs wouldn't be there for another 8,000. This meant these people were walking the Americas when mammoths and saber-toothed cats were still a threat. They were here before the rise of agriculture. According to the history books, people back then were simple hunter-gatherers living in caves. They were not supposed to be building hermetically sealed, glass-lined chambers with magnetized doors. But the age was just the appetizer. The main course was the DNA. And get this, when the geneticists began to map the genome, the computer threw up an error message. It couldn't sequence the strands. It wasn't that the DNA was too damaged, it was that the DNA was too complex. The machine didn't recognize the creature it was looking at. The message in the blood. What they found hidden in the junk DNA was a mathematical impossibility. You need to understand something about DNA. It is made of 4 base letters: A, C, T, and G. These letters arrange themselves to tell your body how to build eyes, how to digest food, and how to breathe. 98% of our DNA is what scientists used to call junk DNA. They thought it was useless trash left over from millions of years of evolution. But in these 3 individuals, the junk DNA wasn't junk. It was organized. The lab technicians in Mexico City noticed a pattern repeating in the non-coding regions of the genome. In a normal human, these regions are chaotic, random. But in these subjects, the sequence repeated with absolute precision. It was a palindrome, a sequence that reads the same forwards and backwards. They labeled it Sequence X473. The lead geneticist, a woman who has mapped thousands of ancient genomes, stated off the record that it looked artificial. Nature is messy, nature makes mistakes, mutations happen. But sequence X473 was flawless. It appeared in all 3 bodies, identical down to the last molecule. That doesn't happen in nature. Even identical twins have slight variations. These 3 people were manufactured. When they ran the sequence through a cryptographic algorithm, things got weird. The ratio of the base pairs, the distance between the repeating patterns, perfectly matched the Fibonacci sequence. This is the golden ratio. It is the math of the universe. It is found in spiral galaxies, in hurricanes, and in sunflower seeds. To find it encoded perfectly into the junk DNA of an Ice Age human is like finding a barcode stamped on a dinosaur bone. It suggests intent. It suggests design. The implications were terrifying. If this DNA was designed, who was the designer? We are talking about 12,000 years ago. Humans were chipping flintstones to make spears. We barely had fire under control. We certainly didn't have CRISPR gene editing technology. So the team looked closer. They analyzed the isotopic signature of the bones. This test tells you what kind of water a person drank and what kind of food they ate, which tells you where they lived. The results were baffling. The oxygen isotopes suggested these people lived in an environment with a slightly different atmospheric pressure than sea level, but also different from the high Andes. It didn't match any known region on Earth at that time. But here is the catch: the bone density was 40% higher than a modern human. Their skeletal structure was reinforced. This is exactly what you would need if you were dealing with higher gravity forces, or perhaps if you were engineered to be a warrior class or a worker class that could endure extreme stress. And then, the crazy part. The lab lights went out. Not really, but the metaphorical lights flickered. The team found that the DNA samples were exhibiting faint bioluminescence when exposed to certain UV frequencies. The DNA itself was emitting light. This is a property found in deep-sea jellyfish and certain fungi, not in primates, not in humans. Why would you engineer a human to have glowing DNA? Unless the DNA wasn't just biology, unless it was a storage device. There is a theory in fringe science that DNA can store data better than any silicon chip. 1 gram of DNA can theoretically store hundreds of terabytes of data. The researchers hypothesized that sequence X473 wasn't a gene for blue eyes or tall height. It was a file. They tried to read it. They converted the chemical base pairs into binary code, 0s and 1s. The stream of data that poured out was massive. Most of it was incomprehensible static, but embedded in the static were strings of numbers, constants, mathematical values that represent the orbital period of Venus, the rotational speed of Earth, and the exact distance between the Earth and the Moon. These people were walking encyclopedias. They were living libraries carrying the astronomical knowledge of a lost civilization in their very blood. They were created to preserve knowledge during a time of catastrophe. Remember the date? 12,400 years ago, the Younger Dryas. The world was ending. Comets were hitting the ice caps. Floods were wiping out coastlines. If you knew the end was coming and you couldn't save your cities or your books, where would you hide your knowledge? You would hide it inside the one thing that survives, life. You would write your secrets into the genetic code of the survivors. But the story doesn't end with 3 dead bodies in a chamber, because the team did what any good scientist would do. They checked to see if this lineage was extinct. They ran the sequence against the global database of modern human DNA. They expected 0 matches. They were wrong. The signal is still active. A living ancient secret. The database search returned a low probability match. It wasn't a direct hit, but a ghost of a hit. Traces of sequence hex 473 were found in a very specific, very isolated population. Deep in the highlands of the Yucatan Peninsula, far away from the tourist beaches of Cancun, there are communities that still speak the old dialects. These are villages that the Spanish conquistadors never fully conquered. The terrain is too rough, the jungle too thick. The people there have lived in isolation for centuries. Anthropologists have always noted that these villagers are different. They are known for their incredible memory. There are elders who can recite oral histories that span hundreds of years without missing a word. They have an unusually high resistance to viral infections. And they have strict cultural taboos about marriage. They don't marry outsiders. Now we know why. A field team was dispatched to collect fresh samples. They approached the village elders with respect, claiming they were doing a medical study on regional health. When they analyzed the fresh blood samples, the results confirmed the impossible. The sequence was there. It was fragmented, broken down by thousands of years of mixing, but the core architecture of X473 was intact. These people are the great-great-great-grandchildren of the survivors of the deluge. They are the carriers of the database, and that is putting it lightly. The interviews with the elders revealed a folklore that matches the science perfectly. The elders speak of the star ancestors who came down when the sky fell. They say their blood is borrowed and that they must keep it pure for the return. They call themselves the guardians of the old breath. One elder, a man in his 90s who looked 60, told the researchers that his ancestors were given a burden to carry inside them. He didn't know it was DNA. He described it as a song in the blood that sleeps until the great sun wakes it up. This connects directly to the medical anomalies. The researchers found that the cells carrying this sequence possess a heightened ability to repair telomeres. Telomeres are the caps on the ends of your chromosomes that get shorter as you age. When they get too short, you die. In these villagers, the telomeres regenerate faster than in the average human. They age slower. It's not that simple, though. This gift comes with a price. The villagers suffer from vivid collective nightmares. They often describe dreaming of fire falling from the sky, of massive waves, and of a city made of glass shattering. Scientists call this genetic memory. It is controversial, but in animals we know that trauma can be passed down genetically. Mice trained to fear a smell will have offspring that fear that smell. These people are remembering the end of the world from 12,000 years ago. But the most disturbing part of the living DNA connection is not the memory. It is the receiver. Remember the magnetic anomaly at the first dig site? The magnetized door? Well, the team went back to the jungle. They widened the search grid. About 5 miles from the original chamber, deep in a swampy depression that locals avoid, the LiDAR picked up a second anomaly. This one was not a small chamber. It was a ring, a massive, perfect circle, 300 feet in diameter, buried 50 feet down. The team drilled a core sample. They hit metal, not gold, not copper. They hit an alloy of titanium, vanadium, and iridium. Iridium is rare on Earth but common in asteroids. This was space-age metal buried in the Stone Age, and the metal was vibrating. The sensors picked up a low-frequency hum. It pulses exactly once every 11 minutes. It is a heartbeat. The team set up sensitive equipment to analyze the frequency. When they converted the sound wave into a digital visualization, the pattern looked familiar. It was the inverse of sequence X473. Basically, the machine in the swamp is broadcasting a signal that is designed to be received by the DNA in the blood of the villagers. It is a lock and key system. The DNA is the key. The machine is the lock. So here is the deal. You have a population of humans carrying a hidden code. You have a massive ancient machine buried nearby that is humming on a frequency that matches that code. The machine is currently in standby mode. The pulse is weak, but the geological records show that solar activity is increasing. The magnetic field of the Earth is weakening. The researchers believe that the machine is powered by telluric currents, the natural electrical currents that run through the Earth's crust. As the Earth changes, as the sun enters a new maximum, the machine might be powering up. What happens when the signal gets strong enough? Does it unlock the data in the blood? Does it trigger a biological change in the Guardians? Or more terrifyingly, does the DNA trigger the machine? Is the bloodline the activation switch for a weapon or a lifeboat? A one-way ticket to the Pleiades. The map doesn't point to where they came from, but where they went. Let's go back to the artifacts in the first chamber. Among the jade and the gold was a tablet made of a blue stone that hasn't been identified. It looks like lapis lazuli, but harder. Etched into the surface is a star map. Archaeologists love star maps. They usually show the harvest cycles or the movement of Venus. But this map was different. It showed the night sky, but the positions of the stars were off. They were shifted. When astronomers ran the simulation, they dialed back the clock. The stars on the tablet aligned perfectly with the sky as seen from Central America in exactly 10,500 BC. Again, that date. The Younger Dryas. The time of the Great Cataclysm. The map focuses on the constellation of Taurus, specifically the Pleiades star cluster. The Maya called this Tsurab. They believed it was the home of their ancestors, but the tablet has a line connecting our solar system not to a star, but to a dark patch of space between the stars. Modern telescopes know this area. It is a dense molecular cloud, a nursery for new stars. But the tablet labels it with a glyph that translates to the Sky River or the Hollow Road. Theoretical physicists looking at the data have suggested something wild. They call it an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole. The tablet seems to be a navigational chart for a stable corridor through space-time. The glyphs surrounding the map tell a story. They depict the lords of the dual mask descending from the Sky River. They are shown distinct from the humans. They are taller. They have the elongated heads. They are shown handing seeds of light to the humans. We used to think this was just mythology. Humans love stories about gods coming down and giving us corn. But now with the DNA evidence, the seeds of light takes on a literal meaning. They weren't giving us corn, they were giving us genetics. The narrative on the tablet describes a war in the heavens, a fire that eats the dark. It says the lords came here to hide something precious. They couldn't stay. The earth was too heavy, the air too thick. So they left their treasure inside the vessels of clay. Us, the humans. This changes everything we know about the ancient aliens theory. They didn't come here to enslave us to mine gold. They came here to use us as a safety deposit box. We are the backup drive for a civilization that might have been losing a war. The tablet ends with a prophecy, or maybe it is just a schedule. It speaks of the cycle of the 13 Baktuns, which we know ended in 2012. But it also speaks of the era of the awakening, which begins when the sunspots bleed. Right now, in 2025, we are entering a solar maximum that is predicted to be one of the most intense in recorded history. The sun is waking up. The machine in the swamp is humming. The descendants in the highlands are having nightmares. And the DNA sequence X473? In the latest lab tests under exposure to simulated solar radiation, the sequence began to unfold. It started to produce proteins that have never been seen in human biology. We are not just looking at history. We are looking at a metamorphosis, waiting for the return. Deep in the most remote, untouched sector of the Amazon rainforest, there is a coordinate that does not exist on any public map. Pilots are told to fly around it. Locals refuse to speak its name. For decades, satellites passing over this specific grid captured nothing but dense canopy, just trees, just green. But 3 months ago, a rogue LiDAR scan, a laser technology used to see through the foliage, revealed something that shouldn't be there. It wasn't a temple, it wasn't a village. It was a perfect geometric square buried 60 feet underground. The team that went in? They expected to find gold, maybe some pottery. But what they found has terrified the scientific community into silence. They found a sealed chamber. And inside that chamber, the history of the human race just got rewritten. You see, everything we think we know about our past is based on a timeline. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. We think we progressed in a straight line, but what if that line was broken? What if we didn't climb the ladder of evolution alone? What was found in that chamber proves that 12,000 years ago, right in the middle of the Ice Age, someone was already here. And they weren't using stone tools. They were using genetic engineering. The impossible chamber. Let's look at the facts. The excavation team, led by independent contractors, cut through layers of sediment that date back to the Younger Dryas period. This is a time of cataclysm, floods, freezing temperatures, extinction events. Yet beneath this layer of destruction, they hid a door. Not wood, not rock. It was a composite material that our best labs are struggling to identify. It looks like obsidian, but it is harder than diamond. There are no hinges, no handles, just a smooth black surface that hums. When they finally breached the seal, the air inside wasn't stale. It was fresh. It was sterile. And sitting in the center of the room were 7 sarcophagi. Now, usually when you open a grave from 10,000 BC, you find dust, you find bones. But here's the thing. The bodies inside these containers were not skeletons. They were perfectly preserved. They looked like they were sleeping, but they weren't like us. They were taller. Their cranial capacity, the size of their skulls, was 30% larger than a modern human. And when the field medics took tissue samples, the needles didn't break the skin. The skin was too tough. They had to use diamond-tipped drills just to get a drop of blood. And that is where the nightmare began for the mainstream historians. Because when they ran the DNA, the results didn't come back as human. They came back as edited. The biological code. This is the part that the textbooks will try to ignore. The DNA of these 7 sleepers contained markers that do not occur in nature. You see, evolution is messy. Nature makes mistakes. Our DNA is full of junk, leftover data from millions of years of trial and error. But the DNA in the chamber? It was clean. It was efficient. It was streamlined. It looked like code written by a programmer who knew exactly what they were doing. And hidden deep inside the non-coding regions of their genome, the part scientists usually ignore, was a sequence. It repeated over and over again. It wasn't a biological instruction for blue eyes or brown hair. It was binary. Yes, binary code, zeros and ones written into the biological fabric of a human being from the Ice Age. When cryptographers translated the sequence, it wasn't poetry, it wasn't a prayer, it was a frequency, a specific radio frequency. Why would Ice Age humans have a radio frequency written in their blood? Who were they trying to talk to? The machine in the swamp. While the geneticists were panicking over the bodies, the geologists found the source of the signal. 2 miles east of the chamber, buried beneath a massive swamp, the metal detectors went crazy. They found a machine. Now, calling it a machine might be too simple. It is a metallic structure shaped like a teardrop, roughly the size of a school bus. It is made of a titanium alloy that we cannot replicate today. It has no rivets, no welding marks. It looks like it was grown, not built. And it is active. It is emitting a low-frequency pulse, a heartbeat, and guess what? The frequency matches the binary code in the DNA found in the chamber. Exactly. The machine is a transmitter, and the DNA is the receiver. The implications are terrifying. It means that these people in the chamber weren't just rulers or kings, they were technology. They were organic receivers designed to interface with this machine. But the machine has been dormant. It's on standby mode. However, the geologists noticed something alarming. As the solar cycle began to peak this year, the machine's pulse started to speed up. It is waking up. The Guardians. But the story gets stranger. Because the jungle around this site isn't empty. There is a local tribe that lives in the exclusion zone. They have no name in the modern records. They avoid contact. They are aggressive toward outsiders. For years, anthropologists thought they were just an isolated group. But after the discovery of the chamber, they took a closer look at these people. They realized that this tribe never gets sick. They don't get malaria. They don't get cancer. Their teeth never rot. They live to be over 100 years old, retaining the strength of a 20-year-old until the day they die. The team managed to get a hair sample from one of their camps, and when they tested it, the lab went silent. These people share the same genetic markers as the sleepers in the chamber. They are the descendants. They are the Guardians. For 12,000 years, they have been breeding, passing down this artificial genetic code, keeping the bloodline pure. They are living near the machine for a reason. They are guarding it. Or maybe they are waiting for it. They call themselves the Children of the Return, and according to their oral history, they were left behind to watch the metal seed until the Sky Fathers come back to harvest. The star map and the Maya. This brings us to the connection that ties it all together. Inside the sealed chamber on the ceiling above the sleepers was a star map. It didn't show the sky as it looks today. It showed the sky as it looked 12,500 years ago. And there was a bright line, a trajectory pointing directly to a dark corridor in the Taurus constellation. This isn't the first time we've seen this. The Maya civilization, the greatest astronomers of the ancient world, were obsessed with this exact part of the sky. This discovery completely rewrites the human timeline, but the government has already classified the new site coordinates. Why are they so afraid of us knowing our own history? Do you think we were created as a storage device for an alien race? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more forbidden history.